more like that phrase just for me is like a phrase that like, this sounds dramatic, but I really feel like it could potentially heal the world. That if we stopped writing story, how much more gracious we would be to one another, how much more kind. The world needs so much more kindness these days, and how much more benefit of the doubt and understanding would we give, especially to our patients in the most vulnerable day of their lives. My name is Sarah AWHONN, and I'm located in Los Angeles, California. So Don't Write Your Story came from my personal life. And one of the phrases that sort of come up, we have a lot of bundle birthisms. They're really Sarah-isms. Flex and flow is one of those. One contraction at a time. I have a bunch of them. Someday I will write a book. But this one actually, to me, I've applied to not only like my personal life, but also the bedside, but it came from my personal life. And I was dating and I found this guy who was like really cool and had like a really good story. We had like an amazing connection and I was very excited. And he was just like super wishy-washy. And we had like this amazing connection, went on a couple of dates, and then he just sort of disappeared. He didn't ghost me, but it was like kind of ghosty, and he'd say that he'd like call me and then he wouldn't call me. And so I just felt like I was in this like whiplash land of like, I really like this guy, but I also don't want to be overbearing. So I remember, this is like so distinct. I feel like I was slapped in the face by this phrase. And I was driving up the 101 in Hollywood. Like literally it was so iconic where like Capitol Records is to my left and I can see the Hollywood sign and Griffith Observatory. If you've ever been to LA, you kind of know what I'm talking about. Driving towards the valley. I was just going on and on and on in my mind of like, well, maybe he's married. Well, maybe he is dating 6 other people. Maybe he doesn't like me. Maybe he really likes me. And like, he's so overwhelmed by how much he likes me that he like loves me. And like, that's why he's scared and he's running away. Maybe he has attachment issues. Maybe he has a hidden family. Maybe he like, and I just like had like literally every extreme on the planet going on and on and on in my mind about this poor man that now like I don't even talk to. By the way, we're clearly not together. It did not work out. But as I was reading and like going around and round and writing story, I was smacked in the face with this phrase that was like, smack, don't write his story. And I literally, I was in traffic, of course, because LA, and I was like sitting in my car and I was like, wait a second. And I realized that the way that my brain was trying to fill in all of the gaps of the lack of communication, to be honest, or even some of the communication you're reading into every like different, like he looked at me this way, or like he used this word in his text, like give me a break, right? That like I had created all this story and as a result had created so much suffering for myself that I didn't know his story. And yet at that moment, I realized that like, that's what we do. Because especially in a world in which like we're only getting whatever information we're getting, a very small snippet, and I only have my own personal lived experience, my own vantage point, my own brain, the way I process things. And my brain, we have to recognize, is processing through every single life experience I've ever had. Like, and all of the psychology of our traumas or our positive things we have or our family systems and all of that. And like, I only have my one vantage point that is not the truth. It's my truth, but it's not the full picture. And yet we are constantly reasoning with the world that we like, there's an element of this that like is necessary, right? Like we have to fill in the stories around us in order to make sense of our world. And yet this specific experience helped me to just slow things down and go like, you don't know. And you can fill in all those gaps and you can decide, by the way, I could also decide that he thought I was amazing and he wasn't ready. And then guess what? That is so much better to sit with than he thinks I'm a horrible person. He's not attracted, that I am totally a turn off to him, that like all these things that like a lot of times we catastrophize first. And so that one experience then, of course, like it really, really had me on pause. This is years ago now. This was like very early bundle birth years. And since the number of times that like it comes up in not only conversation, in all of our learning. Like, you've for sure heard me say this if you've taken any of our classes, because I think it not only applies to our personal life, but so much of it applies to the way that we care for patients, the way that we care for each other, and that our actions are constantly being interpreted by the world around us. And that one could be great if the people around you are looking for the positive, but so often, especially in this world, people are going to interpret through their lens, through their vantage point, and likely are going to be more critical first, unless you've done a lot of work to like rein it in and pull it back before they're going to give you the benefit of the doubt. And that really is what it is. And when I think about patient care and where we've like wedded into so many different things that we do, that like, we don't know their story. We don't know why they're acting that way. We don't know why they're anxious. We don't know why they have the relationship that they do, or they've made the choices that they have. And none of it we're entitled to. And we can choose to interpret what we see at face value and choose to be objective and choose to give the benefit of the doubt and choose to have grace and understanding on each other and our patients. And I say each other because work environment's coming. Or we can choose to be judgmental. We can choose to criticize. We can choose to believe the worst in people. And to be honest, anybody functioning like that, that is such a harder, more like, honestly, like it feels like crap to feel that way. Like, who wants to live that way? I definitely don't want to live that way. And so I think the more evolved I've gotten as a human and the more critique that I get, the more successful you get, and the more experiences I have in various environments, the more like that phrase just for me is like a phrase that like, this sounds dramatic, but I really feel like it could potentially heal the world. That if we stopped writing story, how much more gracious we would be to one another, how much more kind. The world needs so much more kindness these days, and how much more benefit of the doubt and understanding would we give, especially to our patients in the most vulnerable day of their lives. And I know for me, like I show up and I'm having a stranger check me and I'm growling in rip-roaring labor, or I'm afraid and I have my traumas boiling to the surface. You know, I want to know that the people caring for me are going to give me the benefit of the doubt and aren't going to judge me and let me show up in my world the way that I am, authentic. Don't we want authenticity? Like, everyone's like, I want you to be authentic, but we don't. Because the moment someone shows up and shows that they're struggling, or shows that they're in pain, or shows that they're scared in whatever environment, we're so quick to judge them. And so my challenge to, and where I like this just keeps coming, and get the passion, my passion for this phrase as sort of a mantra just keeps growing, because I see it. And like, so many of our core issues are writing story. And so when you're out there, ask yourself, like, am I writing story here? And I ask myself that all the time. And to be honest, there have been, especially recently, there's been some circumstances where I'm like, don't write their story. You don't know. And that also includes, and us nurses are not that good at this, is that when they show you who they are, believe them. And so there's also, it's not just giving benefit of the doubt and just like so much grace and understanding, but like being a lot more objective about what's going on and saying, this is what it is. I didn't make that up. This is their action. And therefore I may need to set a boundary, or I may need to not engage, or I may need to, not choose not to write story, but also sort of like separate. I'm not going to make this more than it is, but I'm also going to acknowledge what this is, if that makes sense. This gets into like what I love about what I get to do is sort of like blend the like Eastern Western medicine. That's what I do in a lot of my classes, like bringing it back to physiology and making the more woo-woo stuff feel a lot more scientific and accessible to the way that my brain was trained as a nurse. And so all this is a mantra. It really is using mantras, which we know, meditation and mantras and all, like, this is affirmations, call it whatever, but it's sort of like a coping mechanism / grounding point to come back to that I mean, that's all of our bundle birthisms, flex and flow is a coping mechanism for when life doesn't go as planned, and so when you come back to a phrase that really is poignant and like hits right, and that you can get that like wraps up so much in one little moment, it's a grounding point for us, and that's really where mantras like that, or whatever, many of you probably have one, that like those can be really like centering in the chaos of our lives. And as we try to reason, and as we try to be human and try to figure out life and figure out work and balance, which I don't fully believe in at all, and and navigate the world, that it really it's just a mantra, and it doesn't have to be weird. It actually can be really, really helpful. I think first and foremost, we have to think about our patients, but I definitely alluded to that we go to work and it's not just patient care. Let's be honest. Like, you're not at your bedside the whole time. Let's also be honest, right? And you can't. That's not totally realistic. You have to interact with one another, and we spend not only so much time at work, but so much time with our coworkers that a lot of times they become some of your best friends. They become your family in many ways. They become your support system. You interact potentially more with your coworkers than you do some of your family members or some of your best friends. And so I think when we forget that and we don't bring that to the surface, it's sort of just like, well, it's work, but it's not. And especially in our line of work, this is like heart stuff. This isn't like I go to work and I sit in my cubicle and I type all day in a back office. Like it is so social. It is so communal. Like this job requires teamwork. And the relationships that you make at work can make or break the patient experience. We know this by patient outcomes. So many of our bad outcomes are because of a lack of communication. A lot of our Sentinel events are because of lack of communication and lack of teamwork. And so I think we have to acknowledge that like way the work environment is unique to labor and delivery before I can even answer that. But we also know that a supportive work environment not only leads to better outcomes, that combined with staffing, to be honest. So it's like the perfect recipe is staffing. Yes, go AWHONN staffing standards. And then also a supportive work environment. And we all know that when you show up to work and you are like excited to see the people you're working with, you have that charge and you're like, oh, thank God. Yes, it's going to be a good night. You know who your anesthesiologist is. You know your OB. Oh, my patient's OB. Yes. Like, doesn't it feel so much different than you show up to work and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be made fun of. I'm going to have to hide all night, or this charge nurse is going to pick on me all night or give me the hardest assignment, or gosh, I'm preparing myself and gearing up to be yelled at or abused by other people on the unit. That like those are stark contrasts. And I'm going to verge to say, and I never say never, never say always, but I would say most of us have been there and know exactly what I'm talking about. Myself included. I, in both of my units, have been heavily bullied. And I think that those that are excited, passionate, above and beyond, have a lot of energy, maybe a little bit chatty. I'm a fixer. So like every unit I've ever been a part of, I'm like, ooh, this problem, let's fix it this way, or I'll go do blah, blah, blah. That is not always respected. It's not always looked up to. It's not, and a lot of times I was the target for a lot of that. There have been many, many times that I wanted to quit my job, not because of hating patient care or not wanting to do labor and delivery. It was entirely because of the work environment and being bullied on the unit. And this goes into our regular life. This applies literally everywhere, that like we are especially critical when we're burnt out and when we're tired and when the work environment, not because necessarily even of the relationships in the work environment, but just the constraints and the current state of OB and staffing and the fact that like our patients are more high risk than ever, and then you have moral injury and trauma and all of this like mush pot of issues that then creates humans who are extra stressed out and traumatized. We're not writing each other's story either. That like, I don't know what you've been through and I don't know why you're feeling critical or angry. And we all have been there where like we've been in a bad mood. Myself yesterday, I was like banging around my room and I was like, I have got to flip the switch. And I showed up to work the other day, like in a mood, and walked straight to the back room, which I knew I needed to do to like not make other people feel like they're responsible for my feelings. But like I needed a moment, and I had to be very intentional with bringing myself down to be able to show up even to my team here. And I'm not on the floor right now, that like to show up in a way that like doesn't impact the energy around me. And yet, are we doing that? No. And so you have a bunch of traumatized, tired, overworked, stressed out, high stress environment, high pressure environment people who are showing up. And then you add the layer that like, we don't know what's going on in their personal life. We don't know what kind of like stressors at home. Maybe they're escaping to work and then they escape to another stressful environment. Like, and I realize I'm writing story here, but in a generic sense to help create space for each other. And so when we talk about how this mantra particularly applies for our work environment, is that the same thing applies, that we have our own vantage point and we also have only one thing that we can fully control, which is ourselves. And so when you think about the type of person you want to show up as, that I have full control over my actions, over my energy, over my words I choose, over what time I spend with certain people, how I respond to conflict. And I think if we all owned our own, not only practice in that way, a lot of intention and slowing down and paying attention to how we're feeling. And if you are feeling like you even have the energy to show up, and if you don't, then what are you doing about that? Because your energy is affecting the unit culture. It's affecting your patient care. And that is the only thing that you can control. And so what do we do for our patients? We write their story, but what do we do to each other? That I show up to work, and what happens very quickly, and I'm making this up. This did not actually happen yesterday, but I could have shown up to work yesterday and people see me and they go, she's mad at me. I did something wrong. And then you start replaying in your mind and you're like, oh, yesterday I sent her this message that like maybe I should have sent at a different time, or I was a little more snippy on this, or I didn't finish this and maybe she's mad at this. And now I've created my own suffering when like nothing had to do with them. Literally nothing. Like there was something else that came in and I just was like, I was dysregulated about it and I knew I needed a moment. But all of a sudden we now have sort of like exponentially grown the stress from each other. We know from science that we co-regulate with each other. If I come in and I am calm and I have a smile on my face and I look like this, it creates an environment. But I come in and I'm talking to you like this, and I am really quick in my speech, and I'm hi, nice to meet you, and I'm so happy to be here, and hold on one second, there's this over there. You feel it in your body, And so yes, patient care, but also to our work environment. And so when we walk into our units, we are influencing each other in the energy that we bring. And when somebody shows up, maybe not their best self, we want that authenticity. And what if we just said, I noticed that you look a little down, or I noticed that is there something going on? I'm the queen of this on my team. It's like a nursing thing where you like assess and I'm like, something's going on in their face. Like I see it. And so, it's being curious, not judgmental, to quote Ted Lasso, and like slowing down enough to have compassion on each other, to have compassion on ourselves, to say, I don't know why, but I'm sure they have a good reason for it. And then when you have that relationship, to just say like, hey, what's going on with your energy? And sometimes, I say sometimes, actually all the time, one of the antidotes to that kind of toxic work environment or to that energy is a lot of times just support and knowing that you're not alone and getting it out of the spiral in your brain. And all of a sudden I'm like, thank you for asking. Wow, someone cares. And it helps me downregulate my nervous system and co-regulate and jump on your nervous system to bring calm and care and compassion to the environment. And therefore, then doesn't that feel better? if we all just held space for each other and recognized that each one of our lives are hard, that we're not trying to one up each other's suffering, and yet this is a society problem. And I feel like our unit culture is a microcosm of what's really happening in the world, and yet it's also an environment that we can contribute to and that we can influence and that we can be really intentional about in terms of, one, how we show up in offering that to others. And then also sort of recognizing that we write each other's story. And so reeling it back and going, but that takes you being the bigger person. Because that, I will say, especially from a bullying perspective, one of my obsessions recently has been about burnout, but it's also the culture contributing to burnout. And when you think about being bullied, that often the nice person loses. And it's you either stoop to the level of the bully or you choose to be the bigger person and choose to self-regulate and do the work to say, okay, what truth is here and where can I learn and grow from this? But to continuously be put down and then eventually not also risk getting in trouble because you've now clapped back at the bully, to stand up for yourself. How do we do this? I'm not totally sure right now. And, most of the DMs that I get from you all are this doctor's, one literally yesterday was this doctor threw the forceps across the room, screamed at me this way. Another one from a couple of days ago was that she got in trouble / yelled at / I'm going to call abused verbally for not upping the pit when her MVUs were already over 300 and the baby was there and the contractions were tachysystole. And she's trying to, all of us have been there. You are trying to do the right thing. And yet the work environment and those around us who are dysregulated and not writing story are likely traumatized, or there's something else going on there, or burnt out, that when you bring all of that, it impacts everyone. And at the core, it impacts patient care.